I'm not a fan of the term atheism. I mean, atheism is a term totally without content. It's like being a non-astrologer. I mean, we don't have a word for someone who's not an astrologer. And if astrologers suddenly became ascendant in our society, we wouldn't need to invent non-astrology as a discipline. We could talk about reason and science and evidence and common sense and bullshit and put astrologers in their place. And so it could be with religion. I mean, this is what's anti-scientific. When your certainty, when your convictions don't scale with your evidence. I mean, I'm actually open-minded on the survival of death. I don't know.
You say about reincarnation, that there could even be evidence for it in your book.
Yes, I mean, I can easily tell you what would constitute evidence. I'm not saying this evidence exists, but I mean, I can tell you what would constitute evidence for the truth of Mormonism. It's just not forthcoming.
We're not going to get political on this.
I mean, there are all kinds of scientific things you can say about religion, which religious people tend not to want to hear. I mean, you can say, for instance, that Mormonism is objectively less likely to be true than Christianity. Now, why can you say this? Because Mormonism is just Christianity plus some rather stupid ideas. I think it's a false fear, the idea that we wouldn't find any reason to build beautiful architecture or paint nice paintings, but for indulging certain religious superstitions. It's just not. I think Feynman once wrote that it was a poor poet who must fall silent when he finds out that the sun is actually a massive sphere of hydrogen fusing into helium. I mean, it's not. The claim is that you have to take something on faith to be creative, and I think it's a product of an argument that you used briefly early on, which is a fallacious one. This idea that the percentages of people who do these great, I think you used it in the connection
in terms of goodness, not in terms of art.
Yeah, in terms of goodness.
Right.
Most people.
Was it not fallacious in goodness?
Yeah.
I'm just
well, yeah,
curious.
no, it's fallacious.
Okay.
Most people are doing this good work are doing it for religious reasons. Well, most people, most of the time, have been religious throughout human history. There has been no one else to do the job. This is true.
Yeah.
I mean, most people who have plucked chickens have plucked them while believing in God. That does not mean you need to believe in God to pluck a chicken.
That is.
Science is not in principle committed to the idea that there's no afterlife, or that the mind is identical to the brain,
right,
or that materialism is true. Science is completely open to whatever in fact is true. And if it's true that the consciousness is being run like software on the brain and can, by virtue of ectoplasm or something else we don't understand, can be dissociated from the brain at death, that would be part of our growing scientific understanding of the world if we could discover it. Now, and there are ways we could in fact discover that if it were true. The problem is there are very good reasons to think it's not true. And we know this from now 150 years of neurology, where you damage areas of the brain and faculties are lost. And they're clearly, it's not that everyone with brain damage has their soul perfectly intact, they just can't get the words out. This is everything about your mind can be damaged by damaging the brain. You can cease to recognize faces, you can cease to know the names of animals, but you still know the names of tools. I mean, the fragmentation in the way in which our mind is parcellated at the level of the brain is not at all intuitive, and there's a lot known about it. And what we're being asked to consider is that you damage one part of the brain, and the mind, something about the mind and subjectivity is lost. You damage another, and yet more is lost. And yet if you damage the whole thing at death, we can rise off the brain with all our faculties intact, recognizing grandma and speaking English. The question is, do you ever have to believe anything on insufficient evidence to explore this terrain, to become truly...
and what is sufficient evidence?
Well, it's the kind of evidence everyone in this room demands on any subject other than religion. I mean, there are nuances here. It takes a lot of work to rise to the standard of scientific evidence, but science is the one language game we are playing where we get really straight and rigorous about what constitutes evidence, where there's a process of peer review, where you have a lot of smart people trying to prove you wrong, and where you actually win points by proving yourself wrong. And this is not what religions are up to. Religions are not falsifiable in this way. And I think you used a phrase that I thought was very useful to frame this. You talked about what used to be and what must be, I think was your phrase. And I think we should reflect on what used to be, because our religions come to us out of a tradition, in many cases, of human sacrifice. I mean, human sacrifice was virtually a cultural universal. This is where we come from. These are the roots of religion. It's been by no means rare for a child to be born into this world only to find that he's being raised by religious maniacs who think that the best way to keep the sun on its course or to cure the king's venereal disease is to bury or butcher or burn him alive as an offering to an imaginary god. This is not just the Aztecs. This is the ancient Hebrews. Human sacrifice is in the Hebrew Bible, at times condemned, at times tacitly supported, at times demanded, and then, as you know in the story of Abraham, the demand is recanted. We come from generations of people who did not know a damn thing about the causes of events in the world that really concern them: the spread of disease, the failure of crops, the weather. And so religious discourse has changed. We're not sacrificing people happily now, but it has changed by virtue of progress from the outside. I mean, just certain modes of operation are no longer tenable. When you can get a weather report on the evening news, you no longer have to sacrifice a child in a vain attempt to control the weather. I mean, you have something like host desecration.
Yes.
I don't know if you know about this phenomenon that I came across while researching my first book. The communion host is thought to be, once blessed, is thought to actually physically be the body of Jesus. And therefore, if it's mistreated, this is, you can literally, in torturing a cracker, you are torturing the body of Jesus. There are accounts of whole villages purged of Jews who were accused of having mistreated crackers. So the question is, does the belief in the transubstantiation, which is a belief that I would have thought could be rather harmless, have anything to do with the idea that someone can mistreat a cracker and that you should kill him for it? Yes, it does have something to do. It's impossible to believe in the torture of crackers unless you think transubstantiation is a fact. People begin to worry, well, what about all the good moods? I mean, can you still love people while viewing them as part of this vast fabric of causality? And I find that there is no sacrifice to the good stuff. I mean, it's not. First of all, things have to be sort of situationally appropriate. I'm not constantly looking at my daughter thinking about she's just a part of the physical universe and, wow, neurotransmitters giving rise to all this cuteness. I mean, that's not the mode I'm in, but even to think in those terms, it doesn't cancel the desire for her happiness. It doesn't cancel. I mean, the love survives the truth. It doesn't. Love is not vulnerable to knowing how things are arising, and knowing how things are arising doesn't nullify all the distinctions about the differences the possible differences in human experience that we care about. We still care about living good, happy, easy, positive lives, and what else could we care about? Question is, do you ever have to believe anything on insufficient evidence to explore this terrain, to become truly...
And what is sufficient evidence?
Well, it's the kind of evidence everyone in this room demands on any subject other than religion. I mean, there are nuances here. It takes a lot of work to rise to the standard of scientific evidence, but science is the one language game we are playing where we get really straight and rigorous about what constitutes evidence, where there's a process of peer review, where you have a lot of smart people trying to prove you wrong, and where you actually win points by proving yourself wrong. And this is not what religions are up to. Religions are not falsifiable in this way. The divine origin of certain books figures rather centrally to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Yes.
This entails a variety of claims which are on their face at odds with science. The belief that Jesus was born of a virgin may be a cherished claim for most Christians. It is also a claim about biology. I mean, this is why you can't keep religion and science apart. Their truth claims cannot be disentangled, which is what you want to do.
I don't want to spend my night defending the virgin birth, but well, they don't think that their body doesn't disintegrate. They assume that it does disintegrate. What they assume is that there is something inside of you that is eternal, which I assume as well.
And
it doesn't
the
seem
issue
to
of
me
the resurrection.
doesn't seem to me anti-scientific.
Well, it's anti-scientific if you believe that you have good evidence for that. I mean, this is what's anti-scientific. When your certainty, when your convictions don't scale with your evidence. I mean, I'm actually open-minded on the survival of death. I don't know.
You say about reincarnation, that there could even be evidence for it in your book.
Yes, I mean, I can easily tell you what would constitute evidence. I'm not saying this evidence exists, but I mean, I can tell you what would constitute evidence for the truth of Mormonism. It's just not forthcoming. There are all kinds of scientific things you can say about religion, which religious people tend not to want to hear. I mean, you can say, for instance, that Mormonism is objectively less likely to be true than Christianity. Now, why can you say this? Because Mormonism is just Christianity plus some rather stupid ideas. I think the best way to address the compatibility of science and religion is in the person of Francis Collins. I don't know if you know him. He ran the Human Genome Project for the U.S. He's a medical geneticist, obviously a scientist with a great career in science, and he's also an evangelical Christian. And he's written a book entitled The Language of God, where he claims to square his evangelical Christianity with the last 50 years of molecular biology and argue successfully that God exists. We know this based on scientific principles, and Jesus is his son. Now, I can't say that he's not a scientist, but what I can say is that the place in his book where he tells you when his doubts were truly removed, his conversion experience, testifies to the way the human mind can be partitioned, where a scientist can lapse in the most egregious way in terms of his scientific standards. And because the passage goes like this: I was hiking in the Cascade Mountains and came upon a beautiful frozen waterfall, and my doubts were removed, and I fell to my knees in the dewy grass and surrendered myself to Christ. It's virtually verbatim. So now I would suggest to you that it should be obvious to all of you, and it certainly should have been obvious to Francis Collins, that if a frozen waterfall can testify to the divinity of Jesus, anything can mean anything. He said he actually elaborated on this point in an interview for Time magazine. He said the waterfall was frozen in 3 streams, and this put him in the mind of the Trinity. Okay, this is psychotic thinking in any other context. Worse. It's exactly what we do with Elvis. I mean, or astrology, or anything else that gets laughed off the dais. I mean, just imagine if, or it's what we do with any other god but the God of Abraham. Imagine a political candidate who was forthcoming about his belief in Poseidon. It would be a problem. He could not possibly get elected. It's not like someone has proved that Poseidon doesn't exist. I mean, that is Russell's teapot. You cannot prove that Poseidon doesn't exist. The question is there any good reason to believe he exists? The answer is no. It's the same answer for the God of Abraham. The place to put our faith is in human conversation. I mean, this is all we have to work with. And the choice is to have a truly modern 21st century conversation, availing ourselves of all of the tools and all of the wealth of human effort that is our legacy. Or we can fixate our conversation in a prior century. It can be the 7th century if you're a Muslim. It can be the 5th century BC if you're a Jew. And we can privilege a conversation that was had then among people who could barely see the wisdom of swapping out their child for a goat in a sacrifice, and dignify their claims to understanding reality with some kind of special prescience. And I think we should be very leery of doing that, given what we see about us in the name of religion.
Okay, thank you.
What should we do?
How would you respond
in the aftermath of a faith-based nuclear attack?
And not a nuclear 9/11, I guess.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the faith part is not particularly relevant once the bombs have actually fallen. You may be getting at is just that faith. And this is something obviously that I went into in some detail in my first book, The End of Faith. The problem with otherworldly faith, the problem with the idea that you get everything that you could conceivably want after you die, is that it takes the entirely rational and important motivating component of death out of the equation. So then you can walk around the world meeting people who are in some basic sense eager to die, and they're not bluffing. There are many secular people and religious liberals and religious moderates who think that everybody's bluffing. And it doesn't matter how many people make a suicide video and then blow themselves up. They still think that in some sense you can't trust people's representation of their beliefs. You can't take that at face value. There's always some deeper thing. They've been manipulated, they've been brainwashed, it's politics, it's economics. It's never the faith. I think that faith, the certainty of paradise is intrinsically dangerous. One, because it's very likely false. Right? There's no good reason to believe it. So if you're actually failing to maximize the only circumstance of well-being that you can be certain of. But two, it allows people to do things that would be unthinkable otherwise. And so I do worry about that.
I want to hold you to a close scrutiny of this phrase, which I think is a real shocker, and you must have intended it to be a shocker. Most Muslims are utterly deranged by their religious faith. I've even heard you back off a little bit now. You went from most to some significant subset.
Well, no, let me just make it clear. I'm not backing off of that, because utterly deranged by I set the bar rather low for utter derangement. I mean, my lights, thinking that the Quran is the best book ever written on any subject, really, is getting you pretty close to derangement. Thinking that that someone should be killed for criticizing it, or that it's a real problem that cartoonists caricature the Prophet Muhammad and they should be kidnapped. That this is the kind of treading upon the sanctities of the religion is a real social problem that demands more energy in its criticism than suicide bombing. That, I think, is a kind of derangement that is immensely widespread, and we shouldn't minimize it. I think we have to admit to ourselves that we are confronting the behavior of a death cult among millions and millions of Muslims, not 10,000 who went to training camps in Afghanistan. We are confronting an endorsement of this kind of behavior and a reflexive political solidarity where Muslims side with other Muslims, no matter how sociopathic their behavior, simply because they're other Muslims. We can't deny the problem while trying to encourage a more benign face of the religion. When I do see the world this way, it completely undercuts the basis for hatred. I mean, there is no rationale for hating a person. A few things to say here. It's easy to exaggerate the problem, and it's easy to overlook very important differences among religions. I mean, one problem with a discussion like this is we have a word religion
Right.
that is a suitcase term. I mean, religion is a word like sport. You know, you have a sport like, you know, Thai boxing, where people get killed and hit in the head with elbows and knees, and then you have a sport like lawn bowling. You know, and what is in common between these sports apart from breathing? Not much, and yet they're both sports. And religion is like that. You have a religion like Jainism, which I occasionally reference because it is the one truly nonviolent religion. I mean, the core dogma of Jainism is nonviolence. So that no matter how fanatical you get as a Jain, you are never going to be a Jain suicide bomber. I mean, you simply cannot make sense of it by the lights of Jainism. Now, by no stretch of the imagination is Islam a religion of nonviolence. Islam is a religion of violence in certain circumstances, and it is a great danger to us all that these circumstances can be construed with enough agility as to apply almost anywhere, anytime, to anyone who wants to die for the faith. Now, I'm not saying all Muslims view their religion this way, but there are very few tools within Islam by which to say, oh, Osama bin Laden has completely misconstrued the faith. He has not completely misconstrued the faith. So between Islam and Jainism, you know, we have a range of convictions and behaviors born of them. And the style of discourse that you're using to talk about, again, what religion should be, not what it is, I would argue, just obfuscates this terrain. We have people really killing and dying based on propositions that they are granting credence to, and these beliefs are thriving in a context in which they are immune to criticism. And we are collaborating in that process by not criticizing them publicly, incessantly, relentlessly until we break this spell.
I see. And now another question over here.
This is often claimed, the idea that the Bible is just the best that was possible for that community in that period in history. You know, the 5th century BC was an age of such barbarism that Leviticus is really kind of it's like the U.S. Constitution, a brilliant document. It is not a brilliant document. It is an appalling guide to morality. And just think of how good a book would be if it were authored by the creator of the universe. I mean, there's not a single sentence in any book of the Bible that could not have been written by somebody living in the Iron Age. This is a problem for claiming that this is the best book we have. And so the problem is, if you're living by Leviticus and Deuteronomy, you should be a good Jew for all time. Now, why are you not a good Jew for stoning your neighbor for working on the Sabbath today? You're not, because we have different standards of morality and reasonableness, and we happily do, and those came from outside of religion.
For instance, I think at one point you said to me that you either expected or in fact were receiving more criticism with regard to talking to me than talking to Islamists or even
Absolutely,
jihadists.
yeah.
So he could go and talk to a failed suicide bomber, right?
And everyone's happy.
And that's completely legitimate use of his time, and of course we need to have conversations. How else could we move forward? But talking to famous atheists over here, that's as controversial as it gets. And that is of a piece with this liberal or pseudo-liberal criticism that both of us are getting on this topic, where people can't seem to see that, for one, that we're talking about ideas and their consequences. And everything we say about Islam or Islamism or jihadism, or depending on what the focus is, conservative Islam, applies to white converts to the faith, and it applies to people in 100 different countries and of a wide variety of ethnicities. If ever I say something disparaging about Islam compared to Hinduism or Buddhism, well, then that has nothing to do with racism or the colors of people's skin. I mean, so racism and bigotry against people based on ethnicity or the country they're born, it has nothing to do with this conversation at all. And so this meme of Islamophobia that has been thrown up to prevent conversations of this kind is really quite destructive. And it's something that, I mean, the hypocrisy here should be just shattering to liberals in particular, because you have, as Machi just said, we are abandoning the women and the freethinkers and the gays and the public intellectuals and the apostates in these are the most vulnerable people on earth in Muslim societies, where you have atheist bloggers, or not even atheist bloggers, just secular bloggers.
People like Raif Badawi.
Getting hacked to death, and liberals are not only not giving them any tools by which to better their lives, they are castigating the people who are trying to shine a light on the disproportionate nature of the problem here. And there's no corner of the universe that announces certain events as good or bad or right or wrong. We make those judgments. But in doing that, we seem to be broadcasting our preferences onto a reality that is intrinsically value-free. And where do our preferences come from? Where do our notions of right and wrong and good and evil come from? Well, they clearly are the product of apish impulses and social emotions that have been drummed into us by evolution. And then they get modulated by culture. So you take something like sexual jealousy, for instance. We come from a long line of primate ancestors that were probably quite covetous of one another, despite the fact that everyone was covered with hair. And this possessiveness gets modulated by culture, and so we have something like the institution of marriage, say. And therefore, from the point of view of science, when you look at a statement like it's wrong to cheat on your spouse, it seems like that statement doesn't really track reality in any deep sense. This is just how apes like us learn to worry when we acquire language. It's just conventionally wrong. It can't be really wrong from the point of view of science. This is just an improvisation we're doing on the back of biology. Now, this is where religious people begin to get a little queasy, and I think they should. But they see no alternative, by and large, but to insert the God of Abraham into the clockwork as an invisible arbiter of moral truth. So it's wrong to cheat on your spouse because Yahweh deems that it is so, which is rather odd, because in other moods Yahweh is fond of genocide and slavery and human sacrifice. We, the atheist community, is somewhat culpable for this because we're criticizing faith and irrational belief in gods. What I've run into in talking about Islam specifically among atheists is a sense that we're somehow logically committed to being equally opposed to all religions, irrespective of their effects. So to sort of single out Islam from the point of view of atheism is somehow to be co-opted by by bigotry, by an alliance with Christians. But I mean, there's nothing that demands that we not notice the different consequences between different faiths. I mean, anyone who is just as worried about the Amish or about Anglicans as they are about Islam is just reading the wrong section of the newspaper. So in closing, I just want to remind you of why religion can't be the answer to the question of moral truth. Well, first, there's just the simple fact that all of our scriptures were written by people who, by virtue of their placement in history, had less access to scientific knowledge and what is now basic common sense than any person in this room. In fact, there's not a person in this room who has ever met a person whose worldview is as narrow as the worldview of Abraham or Moses or Jesus or Muhammad. These people knew nothing, next to nothing, that is now, of the facts that are now relevant to us in the 21st century. They knew nothing about the origins of life, the relationship between mind and brain. They didn't know that mental illness was even a category of human suffering. They knew nothing about DNA or viruses or computation or electricity. None of this is in Scripture. Okay, they had no idea why people got sick and died. I mean, unless you saw someone stabbed with a spear, you had no idea why they died.
And in moral terms, with a few notable exceptions, most of these people were no wiser than your average Afghan warlord today. Okay, the most had absolutely no notion that slavery was problematic, that there was something morally unsavory about owning people and treating them like farm equipment. Okay, Jesus and his apostles couldn't see that slavery was worth condemning. In closing, I just want to suggest to you that just as we don't have Christian physics, though the Christians invented physics, and we don't have Muslim algebra, though the Muslims invented algebra, we at some point will not have Christian and Muslim morality. Okay, the truth has to float free of these provincial ideas. What remains for us to discover are all the facts that relate to genuine questions of human well-being. And the goal clearly is to build a global civilization based on shared values. Now, it seems to me the only tool we need to do that is honest and open inquiry. And if faith is ever right about anything in this space, it's just right by accident. Thank you very much. Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible. The response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there.
There's something called the observer effect, where intention orchestrates space-time events, which we then measure as movement and motion and energy and matter. And addressing Sam, we can have a personal relationship with this intelligence, because we have a consciousness that is part of the sea of consciousness. Rumi, the great Sufi poet, said, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the mighty ocean in the drop. And all you have to do is understand the principles of science and understand that you have within you the resources to intuitively grasp this mystery. But one of the things we have to do today, my friends at Caltech, you have given us this opportunity that you have to stop being the jihadists and the Vatican of conservative and orthodox science, which is not relevant anymore.
You asked, Dan, what I meant by woo-woo. That is the very embodiment of woo-woo. Stringing together at a rapid patter of a bunch of scientific-sounding words sprinkled in with some spiritual New Age words doesn't mean anything. And by the way, scientists are not jihadists here. This is Caltech. We're not jihadists. That was really very unspiritual of you, very un-Deepak of you to say that.
Well, you bring out the worst in me.
Maybe you need to meditate a little bit there. I mean, just take just one example of this non-local quantum effects. We're all connected. No, this is not true. When quantum physicists talk about non-locality and the interconnectedness of things, they're talking about things at the quantum level.
Okay, but hold on, Deepak, you spoke for quite some time. The deeper point to make here, and what is...
But I want to address that brain thing that you just said.
Okay, finish. You might not have to, because the deeper point here, and this is where the whole style and content of what you're saying is so deeply unscientific, is that there's not a physicist sitting on this stage right now. Okay, I would never be tempted to lecture a room full of 1,000 people at Caltech about physics. I'm not a physicist. You're not a physicist. And basically every sentence demonstrates that you speak on the subject.
I take resentment at your questioning my scientific credentials. In fact, if anyone on this stage is more scientifically credentialed, it's me. I took physics, chemistry, biology. I'm an MD. I'm a neuroendocrinologist. And I want to object to your saying that the brain does not obey non-local...
This is a game. And it's a game that is designed for export to people who don't know much science and don't know how science is done. And you missed the point of, I wasn't criticizing your scientific credentials. You're an endocrinologist, you're an MD, you're not a theoretical physicist. You don't see arrogance. I mean, you're about as likely to see real arrogance as you're likely to see nudity at a scientific conference. I mean, this is people are constantly offering caveats and hedges toward what they say. Every statement is couched in, I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, but because everyone is desperate to avoid public embarrassment. Now, this seems to be something you're not doing.
In the absence of a conscious entity, the moon remains a radically ambiguous and ceaselessly flowing quantum soup.
Deepak, that is...
That you have to have a conscious being.
The moon?
Yes.
Okay, listen to the sounds in the room. The truth of this fact-value issue actually reaches deeper than that, because science has always been in the values business. We simply cannot speak about facts without embracing certain values. It's not that you can't get an ought from an is. You can't get an is without embracing certain oughts. You can consider the simplest statement of scientific fact. Water is 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. Okay, this seems to be as value-free an utterance as human beings ever make. Okay, but what do we do when someone doubts the truth of this proposition? What if someone comes forward and says, well, I'm sorry, but that's not how I choose to think about water? Okay, what if someone says, I'm a biblical chemist and I read in Genesis 1 that God created water before he created light, which in fact it says in Genesis 1. So therefore there were no stars to fuse hydrogen and helium into heavier elements like oxygen. So there would have been no oxygen to put in the water. So God either there's no oxygen in water, or God made special oxygen. And I don't believe he'd do that, because that would be biblically inelegant. Okay. What could we possibly do with such a person? Okay. All we can do is appeal to scientific values. Okay. And if a person doesn't share those values, the conversation is over. Okay. We must appeal to the value of understanding the world, the value of evidence, in this case, some hundreds of years of evidence in chemistry, the value of logical consistency. Much of what we believe about the world is predicated on the validity of our beliefs about the structure of water. If someone doesn't value evidence, what evidence are you going to provide that proves they should value it? If someone doesn't value logic, what logical argument could you invoke to prove that they should value logic? The variables that Bob wants to invoke here, and again specifically on Islam, economics and political oppression, don't account for this behavior. The 19 hijackers were living in Germany. They all were college educated. Most of them had PhDs. These are engineers and architects. These people, the Germans were monitoring their conversations. Their apartment was bugged for months before 9/11. All these guys talked about was paradise and the Quran and the evils of infidel culture. Read the book Perfect Soldiers. Well, the problem we have is that we desperately want to believe that everyone views the world the same way, and if we could just moderate our behavior, all of our enemies would disappear. It'd be so much easier to imagine that we made our enemies. There's no evidence for that, no credible evidence for that. And so whenever I hear someone on the left, and again, I am on the left on every relevant issue. I think homosexuals should be free to marry. I think taxes should go up on the wealthy. I think the war on drugs should be declared over. I am left. Okay, but when I hear people on the left talk about Osama bin Laden as though he were the Reverend Jim Jones of the Muslim world, I mean, that is a phantasmagorical degree of denial of the obvious. Osama bin Laden could be doing anything else he wants with his life. And the problem we face vis-a-vis Islam is that the version of Islam that he's teaching is really faithful to the Quran and the Hadith. I mean, you have to split hairs to see what he is distorting, if anything. Now, if he were Amish, or a Jain, or even a Buddhist, it would be absolutely obvious what he's distorting. I mean, you just couldn't make sense of his behavior in terms of his faith.